so hopefully you should now all be able to see my presentation. Nods? Yes? Okay, grand. Thumbs up, brilliant. Oh, we have a question? Oh no, hand down, that's fine. Okay, if you want to put any questions in the chat for now, and then we can come to them after the presentation. That's probably the best way to work it. Unless there's anything pressing now, if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a question before we start. No? Okay then, grand. Okay, so yeah, so look back at 2021. For we've got, I know, some new people on the call. We've got people who've been with us last year. So last year we did a review webinar, and I've gone in the same sort of vein for this presentation as just a little overview of what's been going on in 2021 for CSI. So obviously I'm Lydia Deacon. I didn't realise I've not introduced myself. For those of you that have never come to a webinar or seen me, so I'm probably one of the people who emails you and sends you kit and sorts your surveys out. So hello everybody. So yeah, I mean, 2021 started off similar to 2020. Really, we were in a lockdown. Luckily, not as strict or stringent, so we were able to still get out onto the riverbank, which was very good. I mean, you know, from a mental health and well-being point of view, just being out and about, and you know, even if it was just observational surveys that people were taking, it was incredibly beneficial that we were able to get out and do surveys. And so it was, you know, a little bit quiet to start off with, but as soon as restrictions started to lift, we saw a massive increase in people who were interested in joining CSI and in carrying on their surveys from the year before. We continued with our online webinars to try and sort of keep the morale up, as it were, over lockdown. And so we had some good webinars from Florence at the Plymouth Uni about microplastics, and our own Ian Townsend, who talked about sediment. All of these webinars are available on the YouTube channel. I can only see half the presentation. Oh, can everyone see the full presentation? Yeah, okay, all right. Maybe it's your screen. So one of the first sort of highlights for us here at Westcountry Rivers Trust was producing our first scorecards for CSI. Previously to that, the data had ticked along, but we hadn't had the time or resource to do anything with it. So it was really good to finally sit down, work out a method of analysing the data, assigning scores to each of the observational and also the water quality data, and producing an overall grade for each water body that had over 12 samples for that year. So in 2020 we had 25 scorecards to produce. Now this year I have had a quick look, and amazingly we are on over 70, and I think that might go up because yes, we're not even through December yet, so it's an incredible effort. And this goes on, this theme of you know of effort and the amount of samples that have been taken this year is I'll sort of go on to that in the next few slides. But the other thing that we were able to do once sort of restrictions lifted was get out to do some in-person training events. So we have various projects that we're working on that can fund these training events. So on the left hand side we had Connecting the Colne training event, which was great to get over to East Devon. Got a project there, the Connecting the Colne project, as I said. The middle photo is in Plymouth, so we've got our Plymouth River Keepers project. So we trained sort of I think it was about 10 people down there in Plymouth, and then just recently we went up to North Devon, and we worked with Pledge for Nature, which some of you may be familiar with, and trained two lots of groups up in North Devon. So that's been great to do, again, get out and about. But we do have some good online content that's been produced this year. So, you know, we want to ensure that everyone throughout the West Country, no matter whether there's, you know, funding to be able to do training or not, or we don't want that to be a barrier. So, you know, we've worked on the online content this year, and we'll continue to do so next year as well. So having a look at some of the numbers, so for engagement wise, incredibly, we're up 50% on last year in terms of people who have signed up this year, and last year was a record-breaking year. So you can imagine the sort of increase we've had this year. It's been amazing to see so many people who are interested in getting involved with their local rivers. And in terms of surveys as well, that's of course seen a rise as well with the amount of people that are getting involved, and also, you know, keep the people that are keeping going. We've had people now who are going, you know, kept up serving for 6 odd years, which is amazing, really, considering you're all volunteers, but there's a real interest there, so that's fantastic. And at the moment well, when I did this analysis, we had 2,741 surveys completed this year, and to put into context, last year we completed just over 1,000, so it's really quite impressive, and I'm sure that, well, that may well tip over 3,000 if we have a busy December. So here's just a sort of visualization of that, really. So that's the yellow dots are all the samples that have been taken so far in 2021. And that's the water bodies in cycle 1. So 2014, the water bodies throughout the West Country, and we're covering about 30% of those. Last year we were covering about 14%, so that's really nice to see that increase and that spread. It's also good to sort of see where the areas, the gaps and the areas that we want to focus on trying to fill. Cornwall is definitely one of those. You can see that you know, we've got some gaps there, and North Devon is another one as well. So, you know, we've got plenty to work on, but it's really nice to see that coverage growing. So this is quite a sort of broad look. So, you know, it's more of taking all the data from this year. You know, once we've got all the data from 2021, we will obviously produce the scorecards, which will be much more detailed for each water body. But to give you a little overview of the data that's being produced this year, this is a visualization of the phosphate, where we're seeing high phosphate, where we're seeing low phosphate. Obviously, the darker is the higher phosphate areas or the, you know, where we've seen really high values collected. And we've got the same for turbidity as well. It's just nice to sort of visualize where we've seen high values, and you can kind of pinpoint those. Obviously, it won't give that, this isn't any analysis, so we're not sort of looking in detail about where we're seeing sort of average high values, but just to give you a little indicator. And same with dissolved solids, the darker purple being the higher values. And finally, temperature, which the green green values being very low, the higher values in red. Over 20 degrees, you are starting to see a sort of impact on salmonoids. So it's quite sort of poignant, I suppose, to have a look at those red areas. So having a look at the observational data now, so the problem plants, I mean, I think last year it was the same. Himalayan balsam is definitely the most seen problem plant in the West Country. Unfortunately, it does seem to be everywhere, unfortunately, and it does seem to be spreading everywhere. I mean, it spreads very easily, as I'm sure most of you know. So yeah, it's quite a heavy problem. And then obviously it's good to see that the majority of problem plants we're not seeing, you know, there's none. Same with wildlife, obviously. It's tricky, I know, when you're doing surveys to spot wildlife, because often, you know, being a person, you are the disturbance, and you end up missing the wildlife. But it's nice to see that, you know, we're seeing, people are seeing stuff like the, you know, fish and dragonflies and damselflies are quite up there, and as are sort of herons as well. So that's really nice to see that, and other as well. So, you know, it's nice that people are putting in other things as well that they're viewing. So having a look at the pollution sources, so mainly we're seeing none again, but you know, we see a fairly consistent runoff across the board here. So the cattle and stock, the collapsed river banks, the soil runoff, the road runoff as well, and also active outfalls, or inactive outfalls is probably more popular than active outflows. Sorry. But I think it's interesting here to maybe touch on soil runoff and road runoff, because obviously I think one thing we're trying to push for is only ticking these things when you're actually seeing them happen. So you know, you might know that soil runoff occurs in your river, but if you should really only be ticking it, for example, if there's rain and you can see visible soil running off into the river. So evidence of recent pollution, again, you know, obviously none tops it, but, you know, unfortunately litter fly tipping is a big one here. You know, we're seeing a lot of that with our Preventing Plastic Pollution project that we've got in the Tamar. We're seeing, you know, a huge amount of litter in some areas, and it does accumulate around our rivers, and often, you know, they're fly tipping areas as well. You know, the people like to sort of chuck it into hedges near to rivers, so it's yeah, unfortunate we're seeing quite a bit of that. So to wrap up, I don't want to go on for too long. It'd be nice to make sure we have a bit of a Q&A, but we really appreciate all the effort and work you put in this year. It is incredible to see the increase in numbers and surveys this year, and we're really looking forward to an exciting 2022. I know that Simon's going to touch on this in a little while, and you know, we want to make sure that we're getting your input as volunteers as much as possible next year. So look out for more of this sort of thing in the evenings as well, because I realised that our webinars previously have been in the daytime, which can be quite inaccessible for most people. And finally, I just want to say Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I'm off on holiday from tomorrow, so the CSI email might be a little quieter over the Christmas period, but yeah, we definitely look forward to an exciting 2022. But if I stop sharing. Work out how to do that. There we go. Okay, so if you can use the raise your hand, if you want to sort of unmute yourself but raise your hand, maybe use the raised hand or raise your hand. I'll have a look in the chat if there's anything.
If you like, Lydia, as well, I know that a question that comes up quite often actually is what what difference does it make? Where is this data being used? I have put a little presentation together with some examples of that, which I could give. It's only kind of 4 or 5 minutes, and that will give people a chance to kind of stack some questions in the chat as well, maybe that we can work down through. We've already had one from Vicky along those lines that we can kind of
yeah, ideal.
I mean, hopefully it'll be open a bit of a discussion as well, because it's an interesting area. So shall I share my screen and kind of
Please do, Darren.
waft through that? So then I need to probably do that. So can people see that?
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, it's just a little presentation I put together in response to a few of these questions, and I add in river health and our own health as well, because one of the messages we're getting loud and clear from people, and we kind of always knew this would be a thing, is how kind of good it is for us to get out and check our rivers and spend time out there. And if you've not met Anna, she can't be here tonight, and unfortunately she's working. But Anna Dunscombe on the River Dart, or on the River Ashburn, actually, is one of our stars. She's really played a key role in recruiting people across that catchment, and she's done a really nice video, completely unprompted by us, that we've stuck up on our website about how it makes her feel and how helpful it is. But right from the word go, CSI was first sort of dreamt up, if you like, as a way of spotting pollution, and we have this ongoing case. If those of you who've been following things over on the east side of Cornwall on the Tamar, where there's been several pollutions actually from the Davistow creamery, the cheese factory up there, and so this has come to court recently, and sentencing, or the fine, is due to be, they've been found guilty, and the fine is due to be announced in the new year, I think. But this, citizen science and people out doing CSI surveys was a key part of providing that evidence base. There are massive pollution events that were only spotted and only reported to the Environment Agency because people were out doing CSI surveys at the time. We have another case. This is up in North Devon, where again an ongoing issue with a cheese production plant has given sort of serial pollutions to a small river up there. I don't think our volunteer who's been doing that work up there is here tonight either, but she kind of kept reporting these things to the Environment Agency, and she was getting some response from them, but it was kind of underwhelming. And then and she was doing also the riverfly surveys, so reporting on invertebrate communities that were impacted by these serial pollution events. But there's a problem with the EA reporting system, in that if there's no fish left in the river to kill, then they don't deem it as important. So actually this incident here, which occurred one night, and you can see there conductivity, and those of you who know your conductivity values will recognise that 1,638 is pretty high, and the river, although that photo is taken at night, was pretty kind of cheesy, was really the straw that actually, with our input and with our volunteers' input, we were able to get the EA out there promptly, and they kind of found the source, and they think now they've sorted that out. It was a broken pipe leaking into the groundwater that meant that every time it rained, or every time there was a significant discharge from the factory, it wasn't getting treated, it was going straight into the river. So that's a real bonus there. And then the last one is that I've picked out here. I mean, there are a few we could pick from, but you'll all have followed, I'm sure, the recent to's and fro's about CSOs and the government's kind of response to that. There are, if you've seen the Is My River Fit to Play in data from the Rivers Trust, there are a whole host of, like, hundreds of CSOs that are under investigation, and the burden of proof is entirely on the Environment Agency to prove that these CSOs do have a negative impact on the river. You wouldn't think it needed that much explaining, that raw sewage going to the river is bad, but that's the way the legislation works. So we've been really keen to talk to the EA about how our monitoring can kind of highlight some of those immediate and most obvious impacts. And it's things like, on the survey form, you'll see things like sewage fungus, sewage related litter, all those kind of things, the phosphate readings, smothering algae, all those things are actually triggers for the Environment Agency to say, yes, this CSO is having an impact on the water body. Now, up until a couple of months ago, we certainly hadn't deliberately targeted monitoring downstream of sewage treatment works or CSOs, because it's kind of not a nice place to be. It increases the risk of picking up bacterial infections and all that kind of thing. But that's, I think, something that we'll be working on in the new year, is kind of understanding where our regular sample points are within range of picking up an impact from a CSO or a sewage treatment works, and hopefully kind of picking that out. So it's a slightly different question. If all of our sample points were downstream of CSOs, then those scorecards that Lydia showed us before, they wouldn't make quite so much sense, because it's not representative of the catchment as a whole. But no doubt there's a really important role for CSI in determining the impact of these CSOs and other sewage treatment works. And if you haven't checked out the Is My River Fit to Play In map, then there's bound to be links to it on our Facebook page, or if you just Google that, Is My River Fit to Play In Rivers Trust, I'm sure that map will come up, and it tells you for the last year how many CSO spills were in at various treatment works. The other thing, and a lot of you will know this because you're doing it, is the power of communities. So we've got easily over 25. These are just the ones I've named. There are loads more coming on online every week, who are forming together or who are already formed as groups, and they're coming to CSI and saying, how can this help us in our local area? And so thanks to you, you're doing a fantastic job, and it really helps us, because we can kind of give you the tools to go and kind of take charge, if you like, of data collection and environmental understanding in your areas, because the state of Environment Agency monitoring, I'm afraid, is such that if you, with very basic kind of adherence to CSI rules and what we recommend, you'll very quickly be the most well-informed group of people about your local catchment. And so you can really talk with authority when talking to your MP, when talking to your local councils, when talking to your local Environment Agency representatives. And please kind of find out and get in touch with your local catchment partnership, because they are where any funding that is available for improving rivers and environmental protection is often funneled through the catchment partnerships, and they tend to be quite they don't tend to be very well focused towards talking to community groups like you. They basically are talking shops, not just talking shops, but they're mostly working out, talking between the Environment Agency, South West Water, Natural England, the Wildlife Trust, Westcountry Rivers Trust, so that they can be quite removed from that on the ground stuff. So please make yourselves known to the local catchment partnership. Some of you, I'm sure, already would have. The other thing that I'd like to pick up on is that whilst we are trying to equip you with the best balance of low cost but fairly robust and reliable and relevant measuring techniques in terms of the phosphate tests and the turbidity and the dissolved solids, as citizen science starts to grow, and next year it really will grow. There's some major things in the pipeline that mean a lot of people will be turning towards citizen science. That starts to enable us to influence that kind of technology development market. So we're already talking to people about low cost sensors, where at the moment we're deploying sons that might cost £5,000 in some projects, in very few instances, because we don't have that much money. But we're looking at developing tools that could do essentially the same thing for maybe £100 a time. So that means that your community then could have one or more of these sensors deployed in the river all the time, measuring data every 15 minutes and transmitting that data live to a website. So it could be a real game changer in terms of understanding what's going on here and now in your local rivers. And with that comes new technologies then at improving even then the sensing element. So you'll know your little beige, some of you will have beige or white or very old blue TDS probes. Some of the technologies we're looking at and talking to universities about, like the bottom slide there with dissolved oxygen and pH, really mean it could be possible that for not much more than £10 we could get a dissolved oxygen probe and a pH probe built into your TDS probe. It'll be a different color, probably, it wouldn't be my choice, but so these are all things we can look out for in the future, and that's entirely because you have embraced this scheme so readily and so enthusiastically that you're starting to get citizen science really considered as a real kind of player in the field of environmental monitoring. The last thing I really wanted to share this quote from Kate over on, she's over in East Devon, and I know this sums up how a lot of you feel about CSI. I hope you're reading that as I prattle on, because we know that there's a lot more to it than just that cold hard and sort of clinical data. It really is about kind of getting that knowledge out there, getting the community growing, and getting people much more clued up about what's happening in our local rivers, because they really are the litmus test of how our environments are doing. So that's me really for that bit. Are you all back with? Are we back with everybody?
Yeah, we're back.
Cool. Just one thing, I haven't prepared slides on this, but I sort of alluded to it there. You may or may not know that Westcountry Rivers Trust was the first Rivers Trust and is the biggest Rivers Trust. But shortly after Westcountry Rivers Trust was formed, the Rivers Trust was also formed to kind of spread the Rivers Trust approach, if you like, across the country, and kind of bring everybody up to a similar sort of level. Now, there's very different levels of capacity in the Rivers Trust, but the Rivers Trust, as in the national umbrella movement, has really come on leaps and bounds in the last few years, and they've recently won £7 million worth of funding from the Ofwat Innovation Fund. So this is a water industry fund aimed at promoting and enhancing innovation in the water industry. And that fund is entirely about setting up community monitoring and volunteer monitoring. The way they're going to do that over 3 years is by funding 8 demonstration catchments around the country, 8 different catchments. In the West Country, we've been successful in kind of bidding for one of those catchments, and it's going to be the Tamar. Now that means that we'll be able to attract additional resource in terms of staff and money and development costs to really kind of push CSI on to the next level in many ways in the Tamar catchment. And of course, because we can do that, it won't just be the Tamar catchment, it'll be everybody in the West Country, and really show, really bring about some of the improvements that Lydia and I think would like to see, because I think we're very aware that one thing that many of you may not know is that the CSI scheme is by no means Lydia or my full-time job. We work across a whole range of different projects and only can actually spend a relatively small fraction of our time on CSI, but we have been arguing with your help for a long time to kind of get that resource improved. And so in the new year, we'll be employing a couple of new people who, again, will be helping out with CSI. So hopefully you'll start to see, a bit more in terms of support and a bit more in terms of speed of reaction, and a bit more polish. Maybe it's not the right word, a bit, to some of our online resources, because we know, and thank you very much for your patience, that from time to time we can be a bit slow to respond or a bit difficult to get hold of. So kind of watch this space really. I think 2022 is going to be a very exciting year for citizen science. It really will be starting to come into the mainstream, and we've kind of given up, I'm afraid, on the idea that the Environment Agency will be doing monitoring for all of us and monitoring our rivers comprehensively. They wouldn't even try to claim that they can do that themselves now, and so it's really up to all of us to kind of pitch in and hopefully start to make a difference and turn the decline in our rivers' health around, which I think we can do. So I think that's all for me for now. We've got some questions, I'm sure, in the chat.
Thanks. That was really useful. I think Vicky wants to know what sort of different things might happen on the Tamar with the funding.
Okay, so I mean, there's a number. Lydia and I and others at Westcountry Rivers Trust are always talking about how we can make things better and smoother and kind of automate the bits that can be automated without losing that personal link with you when you've got questions or when you need support, which I think is really important. But we're working definitely on ways of, so some of you will know that one of the things we've altered over the last few months, several months really, is this idea of suggesting sample points for you in the sense that we can build then a cohesive network of monitoring points. And if someone kind of adopts a point and does it for several weeks or months and then drops away, we can assign someone else to that point. It makes those scorecards a lot more robust and that makes the data a lot easier to work with and much more useful. So at the moment we kind of we pick those by hand by poring over ordnance survey maps and environment agency sampling databases and various other data sources, whereas we're looking with our GIS team to kind of deliver those as an automatic layer with an online map. So when new people sign in, or even yourself, you'll be able to look on the map and see what sample points are available around you and kind of pick and choose those as you see fit. And also hopefully in a bit more real time, know if a sample point near you has not been done recently. Because one of the things we face is, if someone signs up and says, I want to do this point and that point, and then they start doing some surveys and then maybe stop, and then someone else gets in touch and says, I live here, and they're near the other person, it's kind of a bit of work for us to juggle, has that person stopped? Can we wake them up again and get them going again, or should we assign their points to someone else? Because I know a lot of you feel quite attached to your monitoring points, which is only right and fair. So and then also I think trialing new methods. So we've already started to look into using nitrate, and there are a couple of projects on the go where we have just won some funding to try out some bacteria testing methods. Literally just heard about that the other day. Oh yes, I see Jan's question. Yeah. So E. coli has been a really tricky one. Any methods that we have investigated have been really expensive or not anywhere near the sensitivity we want. And yeah, I think we found one now. We've got funding to buy some. The odd thing, and kind of welcome to our world, is that the funding for these E. coli tests is geographically constrained in theory to the Rivers Fowl, and Roger will prick up his ears now, the Rivers Fowl and the River Par. So I'm hoping, well, I know that in the new year we'll be able to get something like 100 of these E. coli tests. So whilst we'll need to put the bulk of them to the Fowl, where we don't have any volunteers at the moment actually, and the Par, where Roger's doing a fantastic job, I think it would only make sense for us to dish some of those out to some of our more experienced groups and more coherent groups around the place, because I know a lot of you are interested in bacteria. And if we find out that they work really well, they're quite expensive. I think you have to buy them in packs of 50, and they cost £400 for a pack of 50. So it's not an insignificant undertaking. But we'll give them a go, and if they work, then we'll do our best to try and find the funding that will make them more available to everybody. Cool.
I think that Sue wanted you to mention the River Basin management plan.
Yes. Okay. So the Environment Agency, from time to time, every couple of years, they have these river basin management plans, which kind of govern how they sort of plan to manage the river basins, I guess. They recently launched a consultation, so I think by all means have a look at river basin management plan consultations. They're done on a catchment partnership basis, so for us that means Cornwall. Cornwall is one catchment partnership, but then we've got the Tamar, we've got North Devon, South Devon, East Devon, Somerset, and then I saw Chuck was here, West Dorset as well. So they tend to be done on a catchment partnership basis. We have been involved, so the deadline for responses is, I think, April. We have been involved in helping some of those catchment partnerships, which, as I said before, are not as kind of public facing as they could be, not as accessible as they could be. We've been involved in helping some of those catchment partnerships gather responses from the catchment partners, catchment partnership partners. my experience when I first looked at it is that it's almost impossible to penetrate what it actually means. So what I've said to the EA in North Devon, where I'm most closely involved with the catchment partnership, is can we please have some translation from this Environment Agency gobbledygook into plain English, please, so that people can understand what it is exactly you're asking us for. Because honestly, I know a thing or two about rivers, and it didn't make very much sense to me at all. It's very difficult to get hold of the actual plan from the link that's on their website, and we can put that up. Perhaps we can put that up in the chat in a minute. But I mean, you might need a stiff drink before you embark on that journey, because it's very circular links before you eventually, if you've passed all the tests, you end up with a spreadsheet which will have a number of rows which relate to kind of initiatives about rivers, but it's very opaque. And I think what we fed back to the Environment Agency so far is this isn't very good. This is not good enough. If you're expecting public to participate in this consultation, you need to make it a lot more accessible. So hopefully we'll be able to make some progress on that, and we can share that via the Facebook group and the email newsletters. Yes. So are you going to monitor the questions, Lydia, and fire them at me?
Yeah, I will be. Yeah, I know that Jan, you had your hand up. Did you want to say anything?
Yes, please. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. First of all, I wanted to thank you so much, Lydia and Simon, for all you're doing. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
And even more amazing when you say it's not your full-time job, because it seems to me you're on it full-time. So it's very impressive. So thank you. Well, several things, really. I think you've answered one of them about E. coli. We really would like to monitor that. That would be so good for us at the moment. And the second thing is, when it comes to temperature, Lydia, you mentioned temperature, and I wondered what the connection was between temperature and pollution. Yeah,
cool. Well, there's a number of processes by which that works. So the main, well, not the main one necessarily, but one of the main ones is that fish, salmon in particular, salmonids, and so salmon and trout are sensitive to temperature. They they like rivers to be cool in summer and cold in winter as well. Now, what with various changes we've made to land use, it means that the water that's in our rivers spends much less time underground where it can cool down, and it kind of lands on the surface, runs quickly over the surface where it's getting warmed, especially in the summer, before it goes into the rivers. So some of you may have seen, I think I put it on the Facebook group, we've got a real-time water quality monitoring sonde in the River Colne, and we deployed that in July, I think, just at the tail end of a heat wave, and we saw temperatures in the river then of routinely over sort of 22 degrees, and I, not knowing all the answers, I started Googling, what temperatures are detrimental to fish, and saw some terrifying footage really from, I think, the Columbia River in America, where they'd had temperatures of less than 22 degrees, 21 degrees, where salmon were actually, I mean, the headlines were they were beginning to, cook alive. I don't think it's quite that, but at those kind of temperatures, they really can't cope, and their skin, they start to develop ulcers and really horrendous issues. So, it was an eye-opener that in some of our rivers, because there's very little monitoring of this kind that goes on, but in some of our rivers, we're already seeing really high temperatures when we get these long, prolonged dry periods, warm periods in the summer, and particularly exacerbated by not as much water being in the river and not much tree cover, and I say not much water travelling underground. Then we're really vulnerable to those direct impacts of temperature on fish. The other thing is, which is a bit more actually probably more serious in a way, is that warmer temperatures make all those other pollutants much more active and much more harmful. So it kind of speeds up the whole biological process. So one of the main issues with things like organic, so what we call organic matter, politely, sewage or slurry getting into rivers, is it kind of supercharges those biological processes, which lead to a boom and bust in oxygen levels. And when the temperatures are warmer, that's so much worse. And I think, anything else like, pH issues and contaminants in terms of metals and things, they're all much more exacerbated at warmer temperatures. And the flip side is as well, I mean, every year around this time, of the last few years anyway, we start to get queries from our fish teams about the rivers aren't cold enough. As we have these mild winters, as I understand it, salmon on its kind of spawning behaviours is triggered by these cold snaps. So when you get the water temperatures getting down below, I think it's about 7 degrees, that's when salmon get the message to kind of start their spawning behaviours. And so more and more we're finding that water temperatures don't go low enough for long enough in the winter as well.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Jan. Was there anything else you wanted to bring up, or are you?
Well, Simon mentioned monitoring, kind of like having something in the river permanently to monitor. What would that monitor? It probably was on your slide, but I didn't pick it up. I wasn't quick enough.
Okay, so the sort of the go-to instrumentation for that, which we deployed on the Colne, funded by a European EU project, and we convinced them that it would be worth having a sonde there to capture data. Sometimes the Environment Agency will put these data loggers in for investigative purposes, but we wanted to put one in just so we could explore and demonstrate to people the variability of our rivers. We have a large group of volunteers on the Colne, and it's useful for them to see, when you take your TDS reading in the headwaters, how that relates to the readings being observed down at the bottom of the catchment. So the things that are fairly easy to measure, although that sonde does cost around £5,000, is obviously temperature, water level, turbidity. So that's so what you measure with your tube essentially. Dissolved solids, which is done via conductivity. So again, the same as you measure with your little probes. pH and oxygen. And one of the reasons I was showing that particular sensor in my slide is that at the moment pH and oxygen sensors are quite expensive for ones that are reliable. But there are new technologies coming that are completely different, that mean they're not prone to the same errors as previously, and they're much cheaper to produce. So our job is then to convince the people who have that technology at their fingertips that it's economically viable for them to develop a sensor for us to buy, as opposed to putting those sensors in some kind of automotive industry or industry applications where they tend to get a very quick return on their investment. And the other thing, so that sonde measures kind of those parameters. Things like phosphate and nitrate are very difficult to measure using sensors. You can do it with phosphate, but it's currently you're talking about £12,500 for a sensor that does that, and it needs a lot of maintenance. I looked at one that claimed to do, it looks very good actually, that can do real-time E. coli monitoring. That was £40,000. So some of this stuff is very expensive, and part of our job is to investigate ways we can bring those modern technologies, because a lot of these expensive ones they're expensive because they're developed for a relatively small market. So a lot of R&D goes into making them, and they might only sell small numbers of tens of them, as opposed to Apple, who are selling millions of iPods every day probably. So it's difficult to get technology bent towards environmental monitoring. But again, that's why I said in the slide, more people doing it. If you multiply up the 200 and odd people who are doing it in the West Country across the country, then that'll be several thousand. So it does start to change the economics of developing those technologies.
Thank you. Just one other thing. You kindly rushed and did our river record, but I couldn't see it online, and I didn't know why you hadn't put it online.
Just because that's not an official one at the moment. So that's kind of, so keep it quiet. You're the only group that had that done, and that was kind of because I'm really aware that a year is a long time to wait for any kind of feedback on your kind of, especially the catchment wide efforts. And so we were keen to kind of work out how we can turn something around a little bit quicker, that's not got doesn't look quite as good as Lydia's scorecards. It's a bit, I'm a bit more amateurish with my GIS and various things than Lydia, but at the same time, give you a bit more of a faster turnaround on some of those the outputs. It does take a little while, but every time we do it, we're looking at ways to make it quicker. I know that Lydia will be looking forward to creating those 70 odd scorecards, which is amazing. in the new year, because at the moment we haven't automated that process hardly at all. We need to kind of, this may be the year that we actually have to kind of really do that. But this is all very new, you know, no one else is gathering this kind of data, no one else is putting it together in these kind of outputs, which is why what you've helped us build with CSI is being looked at so closely by those people who are looking to replicate it nationally. It really is, you know, ahead of everything else in terms of water quality monitoring, I think.
Well, thank you for doing ours for the Science Festival. It was very much appreciated.
No problem.
And it was useful when I spoke to the town council as well. I did a presentation for them. So
yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, no,
anyone else who needs that kind of thing done, just ask us. If we can't do it, we'll say, but if we can, and if you've got the data that kind of that warrants it. I mean, that was one of the things with Jan's group on the SID. They've been, you know, they've got a very relatively small river, England's shortest river, no less. And they've got a really good set of data, so it really was worth kind of processing that up. And I think that's the kind of thing that we'll be able to do in the new year with all your sort of annual data sets.
Yeah, I think even if it's not specific, the more regular reporting to you guys, it might be more catchment based, as in, you know, Simon was talking about Cornwall catchment, North Devon catchment, so it might be that we get more regular sort of monthly updates on a catchment scale instead of a water body scale. But yeah, do let us know if you want to you know, more detail, and yeah, we are working on making it a bit more efficient and something that can be produced very easily each month. But the other thing to note is that Cartographer does give you a certain degree of analysis through the map, so it is worth exploring the map and getting your head around the Cartographer map, because, you know, you can look at sort of the phosphate values, the turbidity values, etc. And it does give you sort of a view of how that's changing within your area. You can zoom into your area. You can download the basic data. It takes out all the names, so don't worry about GDPR or anything. You know, everyone stays anonymous, but you can download data as well from there. So you know, do take the time to orientate yourself with the map, because it's worth doing. We have a question from Vicky. I do know we've got hands up as well, so don't worry, I will come to you. But just Vicky's asking about the importance of sampling in different weather conditions, such as heavy rain.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one, that, in that essentially with those scorecards, we're trying to provide a kind of representative picture of the catchment. So we know from our continuous monitoring that, you know, high turbidity events, so when it rains and the water gets really brown, they don't last very long. But in a sense, and so they're likely to be missed if you kind of do regular surveying. The approach really should be, and it's a bit of a contradiction, but this is what the Environment Agency do essentially. It's regular but randomised, so once a month-ish, but actually not necessarily on the same day, but also not really crying off if it's kind of wet because you don't like it. So in that sense, obviously there are safety concerns with high flowing rivers that we are also mindful of, but when we produce those scorecards, we have adjusted the kind of the weighting, if you like, for a high turbidity. So it'd be a webinar for another day perhaps about how exactly we generate those grades, the percentages and the grades, A to E or whatever, from the turbidity measurements or the TDS measurements, and it varies from measurement to measurement. So we treat the TDS in a different way to the phosphate, in a different way to the turbidity, and that's in recognition of the fact that a high turbidity reading is statistically it's less likely for you to experience that with the sampling regime that we recommend, and so if you find one or two, that does get a higher weighting. But yes, it's kind of it's one of the limitations of spot sampling that we would all face. Even if we had you out there every day, there'd still be this kind of unbalanced impact of these short-term episodic events, but it is allowed for in the data analysis, and it's why we're also particularly keen to start developing the lower cost but continuous monitoring sensors that can kind of give us that real-time feedback.
I'll go to Trevor and Jane. You've got your hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Hi Lydia, hi Simon. I think you might have answered my question already actually, but I've been in contact with Simon over this year, and also you Lydia. We've got a particularly bad situation on West Edgemore. Yes, okay, I can see you nodded even though you can't see me. And it is ongoing. You did hint you were going to give 6 monthly updates for the scorecards. Is there any chance still of doing that? Or?
Yes, we
by
can
the way, I think I've got another 6 people in the pipeline to be monitors for this area.
Excellent. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's cropped up as a real issue this year, hasn't it? And I think the restrictions on planning have really got a lot of people who wouldn't normally look at water quality looking that way. We have the same situation on the Camel, I think, in Cornwall. So yes, that's just one that if you remind me, I can pull together that data. Well, consider this me reminded. We'll pull together that data shortly.
Oh, thank you very much. I mean, it's the agricultural pollution, because there are no combined sewer outlets on West Edgemore and only a tiny stream. So this was as a result of about 50,000 tonnes of slurry wash sand being dumped directly on a Ramsar site, followed by about 120,000 gallons of raw cattle slurry as well on the same 10 fields.
Yeah, it's incredible. Really.
Incredible, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Trevor.
Just one more question. You don't have an update on the Wells Bishop's Palace moat, do you? BBC, and it seemed to be pouring with slurry and heavily polluted. And you haven't seen that? EA were taking away samples, and it's supposed to be coming somewhere on the Mendips through goodness knows where.
No, I'll have a look for that. Thanks, Trevor.
Okay.
Cheers, Trevor. I see that Mike, you've got a question about kits, so I'll tackle that one. Kits have been a bit of a headache for me this year, so I have to apologise. Most of you have to wait more than your fair share of time for kits. Mainly because we have seen an unprecedented amount of people sign up, and we just haven't had that before, so we weren't really prepared. The way that cash flow runs through CSI is quite limited. We do have, especially this year, we've had to sort of scrimp from where we can. However, one thing that's been a really amazing and has supported the kits going out is the donations that we've received. I know that recently I've been plying you all with emails about the big give, and we were really amazingly successful with that. We got our target. We raised £12,600 for CSI and education, and that will help us massively with kits. So we've had supply issues, we've had sort of resource and funding issues. I'm really sorry for those that are waiting for kit. I won't be able to get them to you before Christmas, unfortunately. It's due to staff being off, and the process that we have to go through to buy kit has to go through various different stages, and unfortunately just haven't got that far yet for the December sign off. So January I'll be sending probably about 50 kits. So you know, we'll definitely, you know, we'll have a load coming in January, and I'm hopeful that next year the way that the funding will come in will mean that we will have plenty of kits every month, and there won't have to be a wait. But yes, I do apologise for the wait that we've had this year. But yes, we will
that
get
big give money should land, I think, either towards the end of January or early February, and that should really buy us a lot of kits and a lot of kind of time in terms of getting other funding in place. So that should make things a lot smoother.
Mel's got a question about visiting more than one sampling point a day. I tend to blitz mine and visit 4 or 5 points along the same river in a couple of hours, but not sure if this could cause problems.
No, that should be absolutely fine. I mean, the points are really kind of chosen in to give us a nice kind of geographical spread. So if you've got 2 points that are within a couple of kilometres, in theory they could tell us something different, and having that data on the same day is no problem at all.
Yeah, and just one from Sue about the farmer engagement, particularly obviously with her Creedy catchment.
Yeah, so we have a team of probably, 15 or 20 farm advisors, or the land team, which are mostly farm advisors now. Unfortunately, in many ways, well, it's the way it is. They tend to be geographically restricted to various projects. So where funding comes through, so a lot of them work on upstream thinking, which is our project with South West Water, which looks at the main drinking water catchments in Devon and Cornwall. So the Tamar, the Foy, the Dart, the Exe and the Otter. And we have other projects in other places like the Culm, where we have funding for those farm advisors to work. But I don't think, to my knowledge, we're not working at all on the Creedy at the moment. So Westcountry Rivers Trust farm advisors will most likely not be on the Creedy, and this is just because, you know, they can only really go where they have funding. So there may be other avenues there. I don't know if that's a catchment sensitive farming area.
Vanessa said she spotted. Oh, sorry.
That's right. Go ahead.
No, I didn't realise I was unmuted.
Vanessa had spotted one of our advisors out on the Creedy.
I'll go. Sorry.
No, so yeah, there might be, you know, people from other organisations, Devon Wildlife Trust or FWAG Southwest or Catchment Sensitive Farming out on the Creedy, but to my knowledge, Westcountry Rivers Trust are not there at the moment, unfortunately. This is one of the great things about CSI, is that for the first time ever, we can literally have a presence through you in all of the catchments in the West Country all of the time, whereas that's something we've not been able to do. There are, as I keep telling people, 854 or so water bodies in the West Country Rivers Trust patch. We're by far the Rivers Trust that covers the biggest area. We have the biggest number of staff, but if you compare that to kind of the number of Environment Agency staff employed in the West Country region, we're a tiny little group. So we're very thinly stretched, but you are really helping us to kind of reach our tentacles into places where we weren't before able to.
Okay, so we're coming to the end, really, but I don't want to keep everybody. But if we have last question, so Jan, do you want to say anything?
Yes. Concerning the Environment Agency, they do monitoring in one place, as you pointed out to me, Simon, and I looked at the data online, and quite frankly, I cannot make head nor tail of their data. It's just a string of figures, and I don't know what the values mean, and I don't know whether other people have had a similar experience, and if we could have some guidance on that, I'd appreciate it at a later date.
Yeah, it's something we can work on. It's one of my bugbears as well, in that, you know, what we've been really careful with CSI is that when you take a phosphate reading or a turbidity reading, we have the data around, you know, has it been raining, is the river flow high or low, anything else going on. All that contextual data makes it so much more useful. You don't get any of that with the Environment Agency data, I'm afraid. It's just, you know, what they see on the day in terms of the water quality testing, and no contextual data at all. Which does, especially as that number of samples starts to drop and the number of points starts to drop and that data becomes full of holes, it makes it very difficult to have any kind of real faith in what they then proclaim to kind of that data tells them. Because, you know, one of the big eye openers for us, and it's when we really stepped up the CSI scheme, was when the 2019 Water Framework Directive assessments were released, which I think was finally in 2020, that whilst they proclaim then to give rivers a grade of, you know, good, bad or indifferent for oxygen and ammonia and all these things, they can give a river a rating for oxygen when they've not taken an oxygen test for maybe 3 or 4 years. So it's kind of yeah, it's not good enough in my opinion, and so that's why we're working with them, you know, to kind of to make sure really that we get them to focus their resources, their monitoring resources, on what they can only do and what they can do best. So there's lots of stuff that we can't do easily at the moment with CSI, and that's things like, you know, some of the trace organic pollutants, some of these persistent organic chemicals and contaminants that are of such a concern, you know, that bioaccumulate in fish tissues. Those kind of advanced tests and some of the fish surveys, I mean, you know, how many fish live in our rivers is a really important way of understanding their health. And that's very difficult for us to do, or for you to do on our behalf. So we're really trying to focus the Environment Agency on making sure they carry on doing those things. But it's a struggle. They really don't have very much in the way of resources. And, you know, whilst the people on the ground are by and large amazing people, you know, I've got nothing but good stuff to say about them. They are working in a very difficult environment with their sort of management philosophy, if you can call it that, around, you know, exactly where their priorities lie and what they're able to do with their time, and the kind of legislative background that they're working against. It's really difficult for them. So by and large, they're really, really supportive of the work you're doing, and that's one thing we're working hard on, is making sure that we're, wherever possible, collecting data that they can use. You know, and I picked up in my presentation, I think, about the idea of these demonstrating the impact of sewage treatment works, which should be obvious but isn't. It can be quite difficult to kind of put numbers on that, but I think our work is helping with that a great deal.
Yeah, and one thing to note is actually something I've talked today with one of my colleagues, is how we can somehow give you an idea of past data on your rivers and give you an idea of what's good, what's bad, you know, because that's a question I get asked a lot, and it's not an easy job, hence why we give you very vague answers usually. But you know, using the data that is out there, can we somehow give you that? And it might be a job for a student. We get student placements, so it could be something that we get students to really delve into this data and get, you know, make it more accessible and easier to understand, and translate it into something that you can then compare your data to.
Thank you.
Vanessa, I think you've got your hand up.
Yes, just a general comment, not specifically on water quality and so on. I'm sure we're all aware that there is a bird flu epidemic going on at the moment. I spotted a dead swan on the Parrot 2 days ago and rang DEFRA whilst I was there. They said that they had had no reports from the southwest so far, and they wouldn't investigate for just one swan. I subsequently continued walking along the Yeo, along what is in fact a Ramsar site near Langport, and I was looking through binoculars, so I can't be that accurate on figures, but I definitely spotted 3 or 4 that had been ripped apart by foxes, so they were clearly dead, and several more that, looking through binoculars, were not moving. I reckoned in total there was a maximum of about 11 that I saw that morning that were probably dead, certainly 6 or 7. I have reported it to DEFRA, of course. They are investigating, and I haven't heard anything back as yet. May not be bird flu, but just to point out that it's something else perhaps we should be looking for.
Yeah, thank you. That's a bit of a worry.
Yeah, I mean, it's on to sort of the reporting side of things, and I know that you guys are fairly well informed and know to ring the EA hotline if you do see anything in terms of pollution, but it's good to spread the word about that as well. And something as well that's come up is the fact that you know, the South West Water emergency hotline can also be rung alongside that. So if it's a South West Water asset, EA and South West Water can be notified about the incidents, the pollution incidents that you see as well. And it's important to record your incident number that they give you, and then we can trace back. And something we're looking at next year is trying to determine how responsive they are. You know, how responsive are South West Water, how responsive are the EA, and the only way we can do that really is by tracking these reports that you guys are making. So make sure you do note down the incident report number in your notes on Cartographer, or send us an email to let us know. And hopefully we can somehow, you know, start tracking this and you know, really getting you know, EA and South West Water involved in this as well, and getting their feedback from each of the incidents that you're reporting. But anyway, it is well, it's gone 7 o'clock now, so I won't take any more of your time. I think that's pretty much it on terms of the questions. But please do email us. I think, you know, I'm around tomorrow. Simon, you're around on Monday as well, I think.
Yep.
So yeah, so we are around for a couple more days. So if you do have anything urgent, then please do email the CSI account, and we can try and get it sorted before Christmas. But if not, I hope you'll have a lovely restful time, and we look forward to communicating and seeing you all in 2022.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you.